Okay, so I will just give you a brief overview of Autodesk Research. So
Mhm.
Autodesk Research is the R&D research and development wing of Autodesk. So it's a very exciting, I mean, not because I only work in Autodesk, but as a scientist, it's an exciting place to work in because we deal with the world's most complex design problems. And Autodesk Research has almost 100 researchers around the world. I work in the Toronto office. So our goal is to advance the state of the art in human computer interaction, computer graphics, simulation, and other areas that is relevant to Autodesk and Autodesk customers, and through scientific innovation and research. So I work in the user interface research group, and this Project Draco started around 2013.
Mm.
So the overarching goal of this tool is to make animation as easy as sketching. I mean, we all love animation. We all see animations, experience dynamic media in the form of games, movies, cartoons. But for most of us, it's really, we are only readers of animations, right? We cannot use it as a way to express ourselves in our day-to-day activities, when we are brainstorming, when we are designing, when we are like collaborating with others and trying to express our ideas. Because, animation is really difficult to create and manage. Imagine what would happen if we could make animation as easy and flexible as sketching. It opens up many possibilities. And we believe that dynamic drawings will become a powerful medium for visual art and communication and design. So our first research prototype was named Project Draco. The goal was to bring life into drawings with subtle animated textures. It's like cinemagraphs, and it owned few awards at that time. And then we continued that line of research. Kitty looks at how to make drawings interactive. And motion amplifiers is all about how to bring cartoon dynamics into the drawings. And energy brushes is about how to bring special effects animation into drawings. So one important attribute about all these works is that they don't use any traditional animation methods.
Oh,
So
it's
there
free.
is no timeline, there is no keyframing, there is no physical simulation. They are all in the context of drawing and design tools. Imagine using them in the context of like Sketchbook or Illustrator or Photoshop or PowerPoint, any kind of graphics design tool. So they don't have any timeline or physical simulation or keyframe. But at the same time, this brings up really interesting UI challenges, which I will talk today.
Mhm.
So as I said, our works were really well received, and it earned many prestigious academic awards, both from academia and both in industry. Among them, our first project, Draco, which was, we worked with the product team, Sketchbook team, and it was released in iPad this year, end of September, I believe, as Sketchbook Motion. And just last week, Apple announced it as the app of the year.
Mm.
So this is the app of the year in the entire 2016. And if you go to iTunes store, you will see it's on the top banner. Sketchbook Motion is the app of the year because it brings new dimensions to the drawing and animation. It's kind of bring these two worlds together closer. So this was a good recognition to have. And this is a really short video of Sketchbook Motion, just to give you an idea, because all the works are developed in the context of this work. So this is just like any other drawing tool. As you can see, it's like Sketchbook. There's all these drawing layers, but there's no timeline. In order to record a motion, what you do is that you just directly manipulate it, and it kind of records the motion. It's performance-based animation. And then it kind of also does space-time synthesis. For instance, if you draw a fraction of a texture, it auto-completes the texture. And then if you can like record motion to individual textures, both on global and granular scale. So you see, it's more like performance based. There is no timeline, and
Mhm.
again, it feels like you're drawing the animation. It makes real animation really accessible. You see, you draw a few raindrops and then like sketch the emitter, and then now it starts raindropping. So we call them kinetic textures. It's more like ambient animation effects.
Mhm.
So once we, I will not go into details about this motion. You can check it out. But once we released the app, we were surprised to see how designers, educators, infographics artists, people who have never done animation, children, teachers embrace this tool because now they have a new way to express themselves, express their design ideas, engineering drawings, communicate with students, and then of course there is artistic effects, right? This literally opens up a new avenue for drawings. We call them dynamic drawings. So this is a context I wanted to give you an overview of the whole thing. And then we started looking at, okay, so we have this animated drawing. How can we make them interactive? So Dean, I know that we didn't discuss it explicitly in the context, but if you want, I can do a quick demo of Kitty, which is like, how can we make these drawings interactive?
Oh, certainly, absolutely.
Okay. Because I think since you are talking about visual thinking, Kit is the most relevant of all these tools. So, okay. So I'm presenting with the tool itself. You can see my screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is an animated drawing, right? And now see, I am interacting with the drawing with the stylus, or I can touch it. So if I swipe from left to right, the velocity of the wind increases. I'm interacting with the drawing. If I swipe even more, the velocity of the wind increases even more. So you see, not only I'm interacting with the drawing, but also I am learning about the system. That, you know, if the wind increases, there is all these effects. The wind field rotated, the mill is rotating faster, there is more emission, the leaves are moving faster. So as a viewer, it helps us to understand the dynamics of a system, how a dynamic system works. In this case, it's an environment. So if I swipe from top to bottom, it starts raining. If I swipe even more, it rains even more, and at some point you can see thunderstorm. So this is an example of interactive drawing, like what interactive drawing has to offer. So basically what happens is that, as Brad Victor says, that dynamic pictures will become a primary medium of visual art and exploration. But it's really difficult to create them, right? Because you need to have programming knowledges, and the fluidity is lost with traditional tools and techniques.
Right.
So basically what happens is that as a viewer, when I interact with the drawing, it triggers some parameter changes. The parameters can be a rotation parameter, it can be opacity parameter, or it can be any other parameter. Basically, an interaction triggers a change of a parameter, and you can see the cause and effect. So this is the definition of dynamic drawings. So we have seen some examples, but let me go through this one. Okay, so now I'll do a demo. How can we create interactive drawings? So in this case, this is an animated drawing, say, authored with sketchbook motion. So there is no interactivity into it, but there are some subtle motions, but no interactivity. So let's say that as an author, I want to add some behaviors into the drawing so that when the users interact with it, they can see how the scene changes. Excuse me. For instance, let's say I specify the path, the trajectory of the egg. Now, as a viewer, when a viewer interacts with it, they can move the egg along the trajectory. So I have added a very simple interactive behavior. In this case, the movement of the egg. But I want to also author some cause and effects. What happens when the egg moves?
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, I want to author some cause and relationships. So I switch to a graph mode, and you can see all the visual entities there. So these are actually all the different layers.
Ah.
So there's no timeline into it, but there's all these different layers and visual entities. So I create a relationship from the egg to the soup splash, so that the splash will happen only when the egg hits the surface of the soup. So again, you can see that there is all these different parameters for the egg and all these different parameters for the soup, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is the emission parameter for the soup and the translation parameter of the egg. So I create a relationship from the motion of the translation of the egg to the emission of the soup. And this is the relationship function. The emission should be 0 up until this point. There will be no emission. And when the egg is near the soup, surface, there will be an emission, and then it becomes 0. So now let's switch to the viewer mode. Like as a viewer, what happens when if I interact with it? So you see, as I move the egg, there is no splash. And when the egg is near the surface, there's a splash.
Right.
And
And then
now,
once it goes down below the surface,
and then
because of the parameter shift you've changed it, it'll stop. Very good.
And only if they hear it, it will continuously emit, because it's timeless.
Mm-hmm.
So because this is of the parameter, it's always here. Now, the cat was hungry, right? The cat will be disappointed because the cat wanted to eat the egg. So you can also author the disappointment. So let's switch to the graph mode. We can say that the cat's eye should move the trajectory of the x, and also the mouth of the cat. The scale of this graphic will change when this is the graphic scale parameter. When the egg is in the pot, the scale will change to 0. Let's see what happens. Let's see the cat's reaction. So again, the cat is disappointed.
Marvelous.
So this is how we create, you can add interactive behaviors into dynamic drawings. And you're talking about visual thinking, right? And there is a great book by Dan Rum about back of napkins. I don't know whether you have read that book.
Yes, I certainly have.
Okay. So in that book, it explains about how our brain processes information, who, what. We process who, like objects, different objects. And then we process spatial information like maps. We process temporal information. We process quantitative information. So these are all our visual thinking tools.
Right.
Actually, this project actually took inspiration from that framework. Okay, how do we represent spatial information, temporal information? And so if you look at all the parameters, our parameters cover all these different aspects of visual thinking. And I will show more examples of it. So this is an animated drawing, again with sketchbook motion. And you can see that as a viewer, there's no interactivity. But I want to add it a data-driven infographics. I want to make it drawing a data-driven infographics so that when I move this, you see the circle in the bottom through the calendar, I can see the weather condition of that particular day. So I want to tie this drawing with an underlying data so that I can see the weather condition of that particular day as I swipe through the calendar. So again, I switch to a calendar and bring a weather file. So this Excel file contains the weather forecast of that particular week. So you see now you will see all the weather. Can you see the snow, wind, temperature, all these attributes in this drop down? Now I create a relationship. Let's say that I create a relationship from the calendar to the snow emission, right? And in this case, I will not sketch the relationship function. I will derive it from the data. So I will derive it from the snow data. So you see the chart is being generated, relationship is generated from the data. At the end of the week, there is more snowfall. Now let's say that I create another relationship from here to the wind. And in this case, I will derive the relationship function from the wind data. So again, it gets more windy at the end of the week, as you can see from the data. And if there is more wind, there will be more jittering. So I'll just add another relationship here. So it took me a few seconds, but now we have a data-driven infographics. Now you see in the beginning of the week, it's a little windy, but there's no snow. It's not that windy, it's just in the middle of the week, it's a lot of snowfall, as you can see in the data, but it's not that windy. But at the end of the week, during the weekend when you're supposed to go out and hang out with friends, as you can see, it's snowy and windy, you can't really go out. So that's how we converted an animated drawing into a data-driven infographics. So you see all these UI elements like makes it a powerful thing to express our ideas and thoughts. And so this is an example of a data-driven infographics. So let's consider this example. This is a comic strip showing how a scene changes over time, right?
Right.
Portraying temporal information. We can, with Kitty, we can consolidate into a single drawing. So in this case, as I interact with the clock, you see the scene changes. I can either interact with the clock or the plant with my mouse or touchpad. And this is how you can portray temporal information into a single dynamic drawing. And this is the relationship function. And this is an example showing how a mechanical bell operates. When the button is pressed, electricity starts to flow. This eventually causes the iron armature, this attracts the iron armature, causing the bell to ring. So you can see how can it become a powerful tool for visual communication and thinking, because as an infographics designer, you can use it for portrait infographics. As an artist, you can draw interactive drawings, responsive drawings. As an educator, you could create these kinds of interactive diagrams. Same for engineers and architects. And finally, as a computer scientist, you can portray how a hardware or software system works. So it becomes a very powerful tool for visual thinking and design and communication. So again, we're trying to bring the world of drawing and animation closer by making it fluid and flexible and accessible. So that's why we are trying to reach out to a wider audience here, not just animators and artists. And we are trying to see like how can animation help in all these different use cases.
Well, I notice it's interesting because you when you pulled open the first drawing, you called it whoever would be creating the imagery as an author rather than as an artist, and I like that very much. The whole concept, changing the framework, that it's not necessarily about our classic use of the word art or artists. That this really is about visualized thinking and
exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
May I ask a question too, to think a little bit about with some of the more sophisticated animation programs, which are Autodesk products, Maya and so on and so forth, where some of the natural physics, for instance, one of the most difficult things for anybody to draw is the classic, what they call the walk cycle. And for somebody who doesn't know, it's the image of somebody walking because the human body has, many joints and limbs, and there's all this motion that happens.
That's true.
And so it has to follow the laws of physics. And you demonstrated some very simple types of motions. This is not to put you on the spot, but have you thought about how to manage some of that kind of issues that comes up in animation of motion of natural forces?
That's an excellent question. So that's where I will move. That's what the following projects address, actually, motion amplifiers and energy brushes, because they're looking at how can you bring that more like stylized dynamics into the context of drawing tools. So if you allow me, I can go through these tools and then demo those tools, and you can see.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you have an overall idea about Draco and Kitty, like about interactive drawings and animated drawings. And then we looked at, okay, so this all looks good, but if you look at the Disney animators or Disney animations, those characters and drawing has kind of like an illusion of life into them, that they're so expressive as if they touches our emotion and heart. So how can we bring that dynamics into our own art worlds? How can we make those kind of dynamics accessible to end users? An interesting aspect of this animation is that think about how the artists think about these effects conceptually, right? Think about this animation. How would an artist create them conceptually, right? Instead, forget about the user interface. An artist would add first follow through because of the drag. And then he would add staging to amplify the motion, like and then he would add slow in, slow out for the timing. And then squash and stretch.
Squash and stretch.
So that's really interesting because you see it really shows that this is how exactly scientists think. They break down a complex problem into simple, understandable things and then compose together. So when we think about animation as an end users, we don't think in that way. That's why it's intimidating. But if we provide that powerful conceptual tools, expose the users to think in that way, or encourage the users to think in these building blocks, with these building blocks, it becomes much more easier to them to comprehend and author animations. So now I will do a demo of motion amplifiers. This is also an extension of Draco, but this brings the cartoon dynamics into the play. So so again, this is a drawing tool, just like the Draco and Kitty. There is no timeline into it, and so I will sketch something really simple. Let's say that I sketch a simple box, and it's saying hi to you, Dean. Hello. And then I will just record a simple motion into it. So you see, when I select the object, this is a raster graphics. It doesn't have any skeleton or anything. It's very simple. It's just like use sketches. And I record the motion. You can see the principles of animations are exposed as these motion amplifiers on the top. You see, so those are actually the principles of animation. You can see the icons on the top. Now let's say that I want to apply slow in and slow out. So you see, immediately the animation exhibits the slow in, slow out. Now let's say I want to apply, the squash and stretch. So can you see the object is exhibiting squash and stretch?
Yes.
It's stretching as it is moving, yeah.
Yeah.
Now let's say I want to apply some staging. Okay, how would it look like if I apply some staging? So it's kind of adding the motion lines. Now, what if I would add some drag, like, then I can specify that this part of the object is rigid, the other part will be the dragging behavior, and then the object is dragging. So you see, now you can create complex dynamics by simply tapping all these different. So expose these principles in such a way so that it's easier for novice users to understand and comprehend.
And it's nice that it's so visual that the grid is exposed to show where the effects are actually happening. That's
Exactly.
Very helpful.
And that is the point of the thing. Like, we don't want to make animation a black box, right? Where you draw something and it automatically makes it beautiful. Then you don't have an understanding, okay, what's happening inside. What we want to do is to provide conceptual tools so that you have the freedom to explore. So let's say that I want to take away staging. I took away the staging. I want to take away the drag.
Right.
And then I want to take away the squash and stretch. Put back the squash and stretch, put back the drag, put back the staging. So from a learning point of view, it's really interesting because as an animator or an artist or amateur, you can experiment with all these dynamics and see what each one adds to an animation or takes away from an animation. And it also resonates with how you learn about animation, right? If you look at the classical animation books, they have their own languages. The animators develop their own language about squash and stretch and so on. But you see, over the last 40 years, animators have developed these languages. They talk with each other about in this language. When an animator talks to each other, they say that, I think you need a bit more anticipation, or I think you need a bit more squash and stretch. So it's kind of, it's a language where they communicate with each other, but that language is being ignored in computer graphics interfaces. Computer graphics is all about simulation and these sliders, and often artists don't have a good intuition, okay, how these things work and why these things work. So we are trying to develop UI that leverages the traditional language of animations. It's like you are talking to a computer in a way how do you talk to a co-author. So in this case, let's say that I imported one of my drawings and I add a motion to it, and then apply slow in, slow out. Now I want to apply some squash and stretch.
Mhm.
As you can see, the shark is stretching, right?
Right.
Now I want to apply some staging, and you can see it's added the motion line. And finally, let's say I want to apply some anticipation. Now the shark moves back before going forward.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, it gives you enough artistic freedom. You can say that this should be the anticipation pose, or this should be the anticipation pose, or this, right?
Yes.
So now you have an animation.
Interesting. I was just dealing with that same exact problem yesterday, working on in Adobe After Effects. It was quite a different challenge.
Okay, so that is, we don't have much time, so I will just quickly go through some of the principles of our designs.
Sure.
So again, going back to this thing, so here is how an animation looks like with sketchbook motion. If you add two amplifiers, this is how it looks like. If you add staging and dragging, this is how it looks like. You can see how much it adds these motion filters. Again, this is how it looks like with 4 amplifiers. If you take away drag, this is how it looks like. If you take away the other effects, this is how it looks like. So again, what a great way to understand the effects of each other, right? You can, and what a great way to experiment with all these different effects. And so there are a few implications of it. One is like, of course, it makes this cartoon dynamics accessible to end users, novice users, right? And another implication is that, you know, from a user interface point of view, like how do you expose these animation principles and styles and in a way that is easy to understand, easy to apply, easy to experiment with, playful user experience. But it also, like, there are fundamental questions like what is a style and what is a principle, and what is the boundary between them, and what is the computational aspects of style. So I think it brings up these really important issues like how do you represent styles in a computational tool? Like, can you mix between different styles? Can you give the freedom to an artist so that they can define their own styles with amplifiers? Can they mix between different styles? So I think there is a really rich avenue out there that is worth exploring, and this project actually brings out some of these questions to the community. So I will quickly go through our other project, which is energy brushes. So this project is also, I think, one of my most favorite ones. This project addresses special effects animation. You know, in motion amplifiers, we are looking at cartoon animation, like animating objects and primary actors. But this is more like animating fire, fluids. How do you animate them? Now, these effects are really difficult because they are driven by external energy and forces, and they are changing over time, right? It's really hard to control something that is changing over time because it's the second order effect. The force is changing itself, the force is changing these objects, and the force is changing itself. So it's kind of a second order effect. So we thought, okay, how can we make these effects accessible to artists? Like, how you make an interface to that gives the artist that freedom and expressiveness, at the same time gives this rich time varying dynamina. So there is a great book by Joseph Gillan named Elemental Magic. If you haven't checked out, I'd recommend you to check out that book.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'm glad you recommended it. It's a wonderful book.
It's a great book. So it's such a great book, and there's a great insight. He was saying that, you know, when we animate special effects, we are not animating things, we're animating energy. It's a very different way of thinking. And then, and he had this book where lot of great examples where he sketches the energy lines. It's very different from traditional VFX animation because of 3 reasons. First is, it's absolutely, you have control, like, because you can draw the lines, you can stylize, you can exaggerate. But again, fundamentally, you can break down a complex effects into these simple energy strokes, energy lines and gestures, right? I mean, an effect looks very complex when you compose it, but it actually composed of simple, understandable chunks, just like the motion amplifiers. So we had an intern, Jun Xing from Hong Kong University, who worked in this project, and the basic idea is that you draw all these energy strokes. Again, there is no timeline. It's a drawing tool. You have different layers, and each of the layer has its own artworks. And within each layer, you can draw these energy gestures and strokes. Each of them emit a particular type of particle. This particle creates energy fields. For instance, like if you take a look now, you see each of the particle has a kind of like energy field around them. So basically what each of the brush creates is that they are kind of creating an energy pattern that is continuously going through. Now, if you draw some like, if you sketch some strokes and put them into energy patterns, this is how it will look like. So you see, I have drawn some 3 strokes and sketched the energy strokes, and then they will deform in along the energy strokes. Now, this is really simple to understand, right? As an artist, you know exactly how it works, and it's very understandable. It's real time. You can change the parameters like the size of the particle, the frequency of the particle, the speed of the particles. You can see in this case, we make the particle bigger in the left, and then it has a certain type of effects. Now, the interesting part comes where how can you compose these energy strokes to create really stylized effects? So in this case, this is a very simple example. In this case, I'm drawing the artist is drawing a simple curve and then sketch a single energy brush, right? And then it kind of creates this predictable energy pattern. Now, the artist adds one more line. Okay, he's still like manipulating the parameters, making more stronger. And then the artist adds one more line, and now you can see some randomness. Now it looks a bit more chaotic, bit more randomness. And then you can create really complicated effects by composing just from 2 simple energy brushes. But the interesting thing is, like, as an artist, how these tools help you to think about an effect. So you're not overwhelming yourself with a physical simulation model or anything. You are starting from very simple energy pattern, and then you are developing these effects in an interactive and iterative manner. So this is another example, like where you draw a very simple water wave. So it's just like a single energy brush. Now you add one more brush, you add one more brush, and you add one more brush. So an effect that looked very chaotic, random, and very intricate to you, now it's very manageable because you have constructed it in an interactive and iterative way. You have constructed it from simple primitives. And it is absolutely controllable, right? You are controlling them with the energy strokes. So again, there is no physical simulation, there is no timeline or keyframing, just like using drawing and conceptual metaphors to bring these tools, to design these tools in a way where it is easier to use and expose to the artist. You can also, bring in some photos and animate the textures. You can crop the textures and animate parts of it. You can create cinemagraphs, and these are some of the other examples where you can bring in some photos and animate fractions of it. So, I mean, if you think about, I'll just, the key takeaways. The key takeaway is that, like, making animation accessible to a broader world, not just animators, teachers, educators, designers, visual thinkers, basically, making them a powerful tool for visually thinking and expressing themselves. But at the same time, we are like, the user interfaces are slightly different from traditional because we're not using keyframe or physical simulation or timeline. So again, trying to bring the world of design and illustration closer to the animation, trying to bridge the difference between these different worlds. And again, you can see that the controls over multiple scales, right? You have controls over in energy brushes, you have controls over the whole brush, but at the same time, you can change the individual particles, their flow fields. I didn't demo it, but if you see the video, you will see that you can design your own particles. And also in sketchbook motion, you have motion controls over multiple scales. And this really, when we make animation accessible and easy to use, it really opens up this avenue, like how all these tools become powerful way of communication within our day-to-day activities, and it brings all these audiences into the play, like teachers, educators, children who can now leverage these technologies. And we are also interested about like not just making animation easy and accessible, but like how to bring powerful conceptual tools. How do artists and designers think about animation? How do they compose complex effects so that it's not just a black box? They know how things works. They know what each effects adds to an animation and what they take away from an animation. So that's where the interactive and iterative design tools comes into play. So our overarching goal is to realize dynamic drawings as a powerful emerging media for visual thinking and communication. And at the same time, so that is our overarching goal, and we are collaborating with the product teams and the rest of the organization to realize these goals.
Well, that's great. Let me congratulate you. First off, of course, on receiving the decision to be considered the best app for 2016 from Apple, and and I see absolutely why, and it's amazing. And so let me ask for anybody who is not an Apple iPad person, when I'm assuming it will be released, because I see you're working on a desktop version of the parts of it. Will there be desktop versions of it, or laptop, or um, Windows 10 or other or Android versions of this coming out in the next, let's say, 6 months, year?
Yeah, we are still working on this plan, so we don't know the details yet because the product teams have their own schedules and agenda, but definitely this is something in consideration. But I want to re-emphasize that we released Draco. I mean, Draco is released as sketchbook motion, but Kitty, motion amplifier, and energy brushes, these are all research prototypes. These are concepts. So, but Autodesk is definitely looking how to make all these different pieces accessible to end users in a broader scope.
That's great. And the other thing to ask is with gaming engines and the gaming world becoming more recognized as not just for kids, so on and so forth, and with AR and VR design work starting to become more prominent, are you going to tie these into those environments as well?
That's a great question. That's something we're looking at this moment, yes. But we don't have a concrete plan yet. But again, as you can see, if you look at the underlying concepts and ideas, they can be equally be applicable for gamings and VRs,
Certainly.
because the concepts are applicable in different domains.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for the demonstration. And as I say, I'm really looking forward to personally working with all of these pieces as soon as they come out on
Okay.
every platform we can try them out on.
Thank you so much.